Hello. We are happy to be back. And on our last episode, Arania, we discussed why we're here together. Let's dig into what redefining return actually looks like in practice. This episode is called The Messy Middle. And if you recall, we talked about we both left corporate America and we're faced with what's next, and more importantly, who have we become? And I know that you and I have had many, many conversations about when it's time to exit. But one of the things that really struck me is, have you calculated the cost of staying misaligned at your company? And I did, as I was thinking about what was next. And those numbers changed everything. That's what made me realize it was time to redefine my return. So let's get into it.
Let's do it, Cherie. The point around the messy middle, right? I mentioned in the last podcast that I can tell when a change is coming on or coming into my life. I have that feeling probably a year before. And it's likely because that messy middle is when you're reconciling, in my opinion, kind of in your soul that there's a change coming, you feel it. And whether or not you face it and decide what that's going to look like is why it feels so messy. For me, there's a time when you avoid it for all the right reasons at the time. But when you think about the cost of it all, I think you're 100% right. When you sit down and really calculate that, it can be staggering. If I think about my personal cost and what that actually cost me, I wasn't getting a lot of sleep. I wasn't seeing family. I wasn't really happy in the aggregate sense. Was I happy doing the work? Yeah, I loved what I did. I could get in there and get the work done. I love the people that I worked with primarily, but I wasn't happy and I wasn't feeling like a whole person. What did that feel like for you?
You know, I'm nodding my head because as chief legal officer and chief compliance officer and all the titles we had, I was an expert at managing external risks for the company. That was my job. But I wasn't managing the biggest risk, and that was the risk to my own authenticity. I really felt lost. And there were times where I would sit back and say, I have the title, I have the paycheck, I have the power, I have the influence, but who am I? Right? So you can have perfect compliance, perfect governance, but if your leadership isn't aligned with who you are, where you are, how you want to show up, something is fundamentally broken.
That's absolutely right. One other quick story is the ability to have the impact on changing the face of the company. One of the last projects I had was to effectively reposition and subsequently rebrand the company. And that opportunity was amazing because we wanted our external customers to understand the offering that we knew could ultimately benefit their customers and patients. And the charge is exhilarating. And I'm a master of putting on the face. Many executives are, right? You go to meetings, you go to conferences, and you can be on for hours, for 3, 4, 5 days. But at the end of that day, all I needed, what I needed at those trips, what I needed was rest and sleep because I had been on for so long, right? And ultimately, still the balance was off. You love it, I'm exhilarated, but how I define myself in the greater context beyond work, that really wasn't being fulfilled. And it was at that moment when the misalignment came to a head for me when I was faced with a new choice.
For me, I can recall when we both, back a couple years ago, were recognized as most influential Black executives. And to your point, the feeling was, you were on top of your game. You were doing what you needed to do. But I just remember after receiving that award, just wrestling with the question of, is this sustainable? Is this sustainable? I had the authority, the titles, the impact. We chatted about it. I had the network, but I really felt drained. And I was crying. I literally was, again, on the way to getting an award, but sitting there crying like, gosh, I don't know how much more of this I can do.
Yeah. You feel
Hmm.
inauthentic. And in some ways, you've earned the recognition and it should come, right? Because you are
Yeah.
sitting in an influential seat. But we also think as Black women, hey, we have an opportunity, we have a platform. How do we best utilize this to lift
Mhm.
others, right? And on top of that, you
That's
can't mess it
right.
up. But the reality is we're just humans,
Yeah.
at the end
Hmm.
of it. Um, Thinking about how we felt, a lot of folks would call that burnout, and I would call it burnout, right? You're a functioning, burnt out individual. And so just taking a look at some of the statistics, 66% of employees are experiencing burnout. And I would say that those numbers are probably higher as people work very hard to demonstrate their value in today's world, especially with all the change coming with AI for those white collar workers. People are really extending themselves probably far beyond where they should be, knowing that the inevitable will come, right? So it's at an all time high. And alongside that, when you think about people sitting inside of companies today, manager trust is important, but it's also at an all time low. It's dropped from 46% to 29%, and it was at 46% in 2022. So if you think about the combination of people being nervous, to some extent burnt out, and having low trust in their managers and even the companies, many people are facing this challenge that you and I faced in terms of what does my life look like, and how do I return to myself in a place where I have more security that I drive and I control.
And I think the data on Black women is even more striking. And before I tap into a couple of these just really impactful data points, one of the feelings that I had was a feeling of guilt, right? Like I knew I worked really hard to get where I was, and I knew that many people were relying on me. And in many ways, I was kind of lifting up others at the same time, but I felt guilt to want to rest and want to give myself grace because I had so many things and so many people riding on me and so many folks who were very happy for me that I made it to this spot. And so I think that weight is even harder and higher on Black women. And some of the data that we touched on in the first episode, but I just think it's really important to just reiterate, nearly 600,000, and that number has been growing. 600,000 Black women have been economically sidelined since February 2025. And that data is as of November 2025. That's a $9.2 billion GDP loss. Let that sink in. The unemployment rate for Black women went from 5.4% to 7.3%. And when you factor in those that were pushed out entirely, the real rate is probably closer to 10.3%. Then we talk about startups and entrepreneurs and venture. And it's also a fact that Black women are only getting 3% of venture capital funding. So there's a $10 trillion revenue gap between women and men owned businesses. So we really have the statistics to justify our need to take a pause and redefine.
No, that's 100% true. Maybe, kind of going from the macro to the micro, right? We talk about what does it take to redefine, right? Because we have all these stats. Unless you can actualize that personally, those things, right? You can get lost and overwhelmed in the numbers, and we don't want our listeners to feel that way. And so it goes back to the question you said and kind of the questions you asked yourself, Cherie, which was, who am I? Right? So it's understanding and establishing your identity outside of whatever walls you're in. And if it's in corporate America, your existing job, no matter what you're doing, right? If you've established an identity that's tied to something that you don't control or own, right? Then you're at risk, right? So, one of the important lessons that I learned in kind of reestablishing myself is getting back to myself and knowing that I created my identity. The world did not give that to me, right? And nothing that the world didn't award you can be taken away. And so learning to separate myself from the accolades and the awards, those things don't ultimately, in my opinion, in the end mean anything. It's always been about the impact, but I had to go back and root myself in, for me, right? What was it that the higher power no matter whatever higher power you identify with, gave you uniquely, that created you, that was able to be successful in that particular construct, right? And so remembering who I was and re-identifying with who I was one of the most important transitions that allowed me to separate mentally from that construct and to embrace something different. So the identity crisis of it all is a super important step as you're in this messy middle and work. In my opinion, sure, that's really necessary. That
Yeah.
has to be done.
Let's dig into that just a little bit because it's hard to make that separation. And for me, I needed some help. I needed help to be able to do that because I was caught up, right? I knew that I was doing good work. I knew that I had all these accolades and I acquired additional skills at every company. And those were part of me, right? That made the fabric of who I was. But how did you transition from, hey, I know I feel good about my skills. I don't feel very good about the environment that I'm in. How did you pull yourself back together? Did you do it on your own? Did you seek, prayer? Did you seek a coach? Tell me how you were able to make that transition because we all need help. And I think part of our culture as women and as women of color is sometimes we are the ones that are giving the help versus receiving it. So tell me about that journey a little bit.
Yeah.
I know you and I have had some conversations about that. I'd love to hear more and
Yeah.
have the audience hear about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So throughout my career, I've always had coaches for different things because, as you know, as a busy professional, you cannot be good at everything, and nor did I want to be, right? And so in my history, I've had an executive coach since I was at the director level, but then informally, kind of earlier career, working for this very large entity, they provided us coaches. So I knew the value of coaching for a long time. And at every transition, I've had that. So when this transition hit, really good friend at one of the major consulting agencies lent me a coach, one of their executive transition coaches, because those on the outside of corporate America who deal with the C suite see this all the time, right? And so for about 3 to 4 months, I worked with one of those executive coaches to think about transition. So she got me started on what does a transition really look like? What are the things that I should read? How do executives go on that long walk, right? To really begin to identify what they want, right? What they want their life to look like, starting with designing your life. You mentioned this in the last episode. She helped me go stepwise through this kind of very logical process. But I brought on another coach to help me think outside of the business space. I wanted to think about what impact could I make on the larger world. What I knew is that whenever I stepped outside of the walls of corporate, I got an even greater response for the value that people thought I could bring outside of the four walls, where you're fighting for validity. When I went into the real world and other areas, people could see the value quickly. And I'm like, well, I know that there's an opportunity for me to apply my value in a different sense. But I needed a coach who did not think corporate, who thought about the bigger world and the bigger spaces. She also helped me to emotionally disconnect, right? She helped me to understand the point I made earlier is that corporate America did not award me who I am, right? There were accolades and all the things that came with the excellence that I bring, but I've been that person forever. I was that person before I ever entered corporate America. And so helping me to separate that and then get beyond the emotion and to facilitate the breakup that needed to happen. But that breakup allowed me not to be angry with what took place and understand that for me, the universe, there is no good and bad. There's yin and yang. For every bit of good, there's going to be something bad, right? And she helped me to understand that the sun shines on everybody, no matter how they show up in the world, right? The choice is mine in terms of how to proceed. And so having those coaches to get me started and then get me started in something new and something different was critical to my pivot. Really, really critical to my pivot. And while the healing process, it took some steps to get there and it takes time, having those people in your life really are very important, which I think, Sheree, is why you and I, in addition to the career coaching that we've been doing, receiving and
Yes.
doing, which is why we're doing this podcast, because we want to help more people through this change as they're navigating returning to
That's right.
themselves.
I think that is powerful, but the reality is, Irania, I think you're a unicorn. And what I mean by that is many folks are not necessarily considering a coach early on until something happens, right? So the fact that you were just so introspective and intuitive and thinking about this in advance before there were changes, right? So when you felt that in your gut, you started to say, you know what, I need some help. And if we think about our lives, right? If we have an ailment, we're getting a physical and we're seeing the doctor in advance, and if something is wrong, we see the doctor, we see the dentist when we have something wrong, but also preventatively. For those of us who were in the sports space, we had a coach to kind of guide and help us with improve our game for the future and current. We have marital coaches, we have relationship, we have all these people that are around us, but for some reason having a coach to be able to guide and navigate behind the scenes for many of us is a foreign concept. And in all honesty, I've been at the table where I'm approving coaching contracts, and I know of senior executives who have had coaches, and I'm in the beginning of my career, I'm like, that's not for me. I can navigate this. But then I
Hmm.
saw the value of having a coach. And what it gave me was a sense of comfort because now I had two people working on a matter versus just myself. And if I couldn't get to
Spot on.
something, I'd, ping the coach and say, hey, look, help me think about this. And then when I came back
That's
and
right.
presented, they're like, wow, okay, the way that you're thinking about this is fantastic. And I saw a
That's right.
statistic around coaching, and it was just fascinating to me. Companies are getting 7 times the ROI on coaching investments. So companies know the benefit of having a coach, but I
Absolutely.
don't think we
That's
always
right.
do.
Yeah, people don't always, have that, don't always understand that. At one company, when you hit the VP
Yep.
level, one company I was at, you automatically get
Yes.
get a coach, right? They assign you someone to help you make that transition because they know the investment is important. What I'm finding is that people can use coaching well before that, right? So I think it's ideal at the director level when you get to that stage in a company, because prior to that, you're really earning your way. You're getting those basic skills, and it's difficult to mess up, right? Unless you just want to, and the words you're using are just all wrong. And if that's happening for you, and you're finding that, you probably should engage a coach sooner. Because to your point, Cherie, not only can you ping them when you have a question, can they write your memos? Can they help you think things through? They can also give you the language that you don't have, right? And so they give you the language, they give you the words, they help you negotiate. And so this particular point we're making around
Mhm.
coaching, I have always been very serious about that, and I think it's really critical. So we encourage that, and we're also offering ourselves as coaches for our
That's
audience
right.
as well.
What I love about that is the reality is many of us don't get a second chance. You have one chance to prove yourself, to get it right, and make sure that you're showing up. And that coach gives you that confidence and makes sure that you're getting it right the first time. They are truly, truly in your corner.
That's right. And I think one point here as we kind of move into the next phase here, Sheree, that I want to make is your coach also knows who you are and what you want, right? And so a part of their responsibility is, as they're guiding you, is to remind you of that as you go, right? Because you can get caught up in the trappings or the salary. But the coaches that I had, and my primary coach was always reminding me to consider whether or not the choices I'm making are in line with who I want to be as a person, and to your point, how I
That's
want to
right,
show up.
holding you accountable.
So, Cherie, we've talked about the women and the employees that are exiting the workforce. You gave us some staggering statistics on the number of Black women also that are exiting the workforce. We know that many of those women are thinking about what I do next, just from a basic standpoint of how do I feed my family, right? How do I bring all that I have, women, Black women, men, into the world? And I just want to pick up on kind of how we thought about that, right? We were in, I would say, some privileged positions to be coming out of the C suite because we know that those exits come with a bit of a parachute that gives you time to land in a new role, and to land in a new space. And not everybody has that. You may have some severance, but you may have less time. And we recognize that reality of it all. But a lot of people are turning and working or quickly pivot into what's next to stand up a business idea. And so it's never been a better time to let your creativity come forward and to actually start that next thing that you've been thinking about, right? Take some of those dollars early stage and invest. And for you and I, we both started our businesses and our companies coming out of that pivot. I would say that it took me a little bit longer. I think in the first episode, I shared how for the first 3 to 6 months, I was staring at my ceiling because I just needed a breather, right? I needed to kind of do the work I talked about earlier. And once that work was done, I think things would be clearer when I was emotionally clear, right? And what I've done in that time frame is think about what do I do really well? I fancy myself a CEO type. I know how to run businesses. I know how to grow businesses. And so I began doing work coaching small businesses and startups through thinking about if you're a small business, hey, where should you locate your business and why? What's all the data behind it? Getting small business owners from their idea, their location to kind of getting them approved with banks, right? Because they've got strong data behind all of their assumptions. Working with startups to help them think about what does the market need from you? How do you test the actual market? And then get those ideas and all of what you learn from the market into practice, into your go to market plan, into your overall strategy. And most recently, what's happened is I'm moving from strategists that supporting businesses into an agency that actually deploys chief strategy officers and chief marketing officers backed by strategic intelligence and our proprietary technologies to mid-sized companies who need that capability, right? So taking what I do well, now deploying that because so many businesses need this level of support as they think about their strategy. So making that pivot has been really exciting and exhilarating as people embrace it, take it on. And then I would say, in addition to that, I have probably 7 girlfriends through thinking about the next step, right? How do we modeling what the next venture or the next move could be? And we've stayed in touch as they've made their decisions to either stand up their own business or go back to work. And so it's been an exciting time to kind of bring the strategic and the marketing side of what I do well to bear for people where it really, really
Yes.
matters. How about you? What was your
Yeah.
journey to thinking about where
So
you would be?
thank you for that. And I say thank you because I've been thinking about this and I'm a little bit behind your timeline because I stayed in corporate America for a little bit longer. And really, I got the courage because and I've always been one to provide guidance and coaching, and you and I worked together even when we were employed by a company, working together to provide coaching opportunities for younger executives in the company. That's just always been our thing, and actually what really brought us together. But so I have provided a number of coaching sessions, and actually more formally now. So I'm officially a coach now. But thinking about being an entrepreneur for me was scary. My husband's an entrepreneur. I've been in corporate all of my career. I've served on nonprofit boards, and so I was familiar with corporate, nonprofit, and startup, but not necessarily with me driving. And so I was used to the structure of a corporate environment. And so now having to something as basic as, okay, how do I create my own email address? How do I, which programs do I need to buy? What tools do I need to get? It felt very, very overwhelming at first. But then I took a deep breath, tapped into my network, and really asked myself, what do I do very well? And can I get paid to do that? And that has opened up so many doors. I actually, to be honest with you, I really wanted to just spend my time being an Instagram model
Oh, that's right.
and
Oh,
and
that's right.
travel the world.
Still can.
There's still time.
There's still time.
Um, but I was getting calls with people asking me, hey, how do you think about this from a governance and compliance perspective? How should we be thinking about this? I need some legal help. I need some some thoughts. I need a thought partner with me. I just was asked to leave my role. I'm thinking about leaving my role. I'm thinking about starting a new role. And so what I would say, the process that I embarked on was really just thinking about what it is that I do well and what it is that I think I can get paid to do and what it is that I will enjoy doing. And the convergence of those three things really brought me to being a coach professionally. Speaking, I love speaking, and I've been the keynote speaker for a number of topics. And then, more importantly, was the intersection of intellectual property, which that's my background, compliance, governance, and AI. And so, the work that I'm doing right now is really helping companies advance their AI initiatives from a governance perspective and building in a framework that I've been working on and creating for probably the past 7 to 10 years of my career, but really making it something that's tangible that organizations can use. And just that process of recognizing my excellence, right? Recognizing my excellence and then packaging it up and allowing someone else to pay me for the work and the value that I bring to the organization. It's been so
That's right.
rewarding. It's been a lot. It's been, I'm staying up till the wee hours of the morning. I text and you respond right back at 2 o'clock in the morning. But I'm building something that I can call my own. And that's very different
Mhm.
from, as we talked about in the first episode, building someone else's dream. I'm building my own.
That's right. So, Sheree, picking up on that point around starting a new business, right, which we have both done, I want to make the point that women started 49% of all new businesses in 2024. I can imagine that's even higher now in ending 2025 and moving into 2026. We have to make it happen. And your point around starting a business that's, I would say, authentic to what you bring to the table, that recognizes your excellence, moving into a space of full authenticity at this stage in our careers, as we think about our legacies, is so important, right? Um, Building for other people gave us a wonderful foundation. But what a part of the challenge we're in the messy middle is, as I mentioned earlier, is who am I? How do I return to feeling authentic, right? When you get the awards, these things can feel very hollow because we're not our most authentic selves. And I believe that when we're in a position where we can be that, whether you're inside of a corporation or a company or outside, being your most authentic self is so important, right? And so when I think about the coaching industry and how it supports people being authentic, you don't have to run on all cylinders because when you don't have the support, you're trying to be all things to all people in a lot of cases. So when you're asked about doing public speaking, you might need a coach to help you do that well, right? But you're extending yourself and trying really hard there. You're also trying to just stay alive, right? And feed yourself while you're on planes and be healthy. Maybe you need a fitness coach to go through that, to prescribe the plan so that you don't have to actually think about that. Because when you're stretched too thin, you're in my case, I would say before I hired coaches, which was a long time ago, but trying to cover all that ground, I couldn't show up as myself, right? Without my entourage, right? I needed an entourage to help me be the best me possible. And, the coaching industry is expanding, Cherie. We encourage our listeners to take on coaches. But in the most recent stat is that the coaching industry hit $16 billion in the US, and globally it's going to grow to $174 billion by 2030. This is really important, especially as the world is accelerating towards a new normal, that corporate America and white collar roles are accelerating. Things will not be the same. And so if you're going to navigate this space, now is the time to do it and get some help while you're doing that, to not only ensure that you're ready, but so that you can show up really authentically.
That's right. And I know more than half, I think the last statistic that I heard was about 80% of companies now make the investment into coaching. And so it's really, really, really important. And it really helps to give you the comfort and the roadmap for what's ahead. So I'm super excited about the path and the trajectory we're on. I think it is important to note that this doesn't mean that you are in a toxic situation. You have to run and go and do your own thing. You may be very happy with the level of engagement, the level of investment that your company is providing to you. And that's totally fine. I think what it is that we're saying here is make sure that as much as you are giving, you are receiving. And if you're not receiving that from the company, find other ways to be able to get it. Maybe it's simply you just need a coach to be able to help quantify and categorize the gifts that you're bringing. But in those instances where you decide that the environment that you're in is actually contributing to you feeling the way that you're feeling, then redefining return is really about how do you return to yourself, get stronger mentally, physically, emotionally, so that when you do return to whatever it is that you want to get back to, you're ready.
100%, 100%. And getting help, as you said, is critical in that sense. So, Sheree, we talked about, giving our listeners a framework, right? And some real tools and ways to think about the transition that they're going through. And so I would say that if you're already out, right, you're faced with the challenge of what do I do next? Am I going to look for a job? Right? Am I going to start my own thing? What we know is that if you're thinking about starting your own thing and you're still inside, start it now, right? Keep your day job and start it now because the pressure, if you don't have a golden parachute or you don't have an extended time to think about things or the savings necessary to think about things, there's going to be pressure. So if you're inside the box still, start thinking about this. We know that 33% of entrepreneurs who keep their day jobs have a lower odd of failure, have lower failure odds, is what I want to say. And so take what you have, leverage that role that you're in today, and work those extra hours because as you heard Cherie say earlier and yeah, about how much time we're working, you're going to spend that time either way. The other piece that I'll just hit on here, Cherie, is that if you don't have financial planning resources, and you are sitting in a white collar role, it's never too early to bring those resources on and think about what your rainy day fund looks like, right? Or as my coach calls it, what's your forget you money, right? Where do you need to be to say, I want to change, I want to pivot? And we know that getting caught up in the lifestyle and the trappings, it's easy to spend that money. The best advice is not to do that, but to have someone that's holding you accountable financially so that you can make the pivot before the pivot happens to you. And we know that that's happening for more and more people. So moving from a corporation where you've got a salary to being a startup of one person is a really big move. And I don't want to underestimate or under communicate how important making sure that keeping your job while you have it or setting up your structure while you're in a role is super critical. But then having the financial resources and the plan to leave is also as important.
I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of when you are feeling that feeling, right? Because that feeling is real. That either means that there's a misalignment, either driven by you or driven by the company, but something could happen. And the earlier that you are thinking about your transition, the better. And the more thought and that you can put in earlier, the less stressful it will be. It's always going to be a stressful transition if you decide to leave somewhere. But thinking about that in advance and really creating a framework for my next phase is critical.
Absolutely. Quick story here. I moved all my money into my one single wealth manager, and he holds me accountable, right? So I have a budget, which I haven't been on for ever, really, never had a budget. And it was great, right? And so having someone that I have to call makes me more mindful, but I still have goals, right? I still will retire, right? And staying on track and making sure that any dollar that I spend is strategic at this stage in this transition is so critical, right? I know that you and I have talked about vacationing, right? And while um, I have had a longer time out than you have, those kinds of things I think twice about, right? It's like, well, maybe I just need to hold on. While I could do anything I want to do, it's probably not the best idea today, right? I can get out and walk, right? I live in Alabama. Let me go for a walk down these streets get some lemonade, sit on the back porch and do it different in the short term until the foundation is set. Right now, have I gone on the vacations? I've done the vacations, right? In the year difference, I think between our exits, I've had a lot of fun, but I honestly think twice about building my business versus taking that time and then finding alternative ways to get that same kind of energy out and that the stress off, in ways that were different than what I may have done before.
I think one other point that's worth mentioning here too, and there are again a couple of different aspects of preparation, but one other point here is while you are still employed, it's critical that you start to take a look at some of those peripheral aspects of your life that either need to be buttoned up or you just need to have that peace of mind. And one in particular is your health. So if you have a pretty decent health program and on a good insurance plan, what I found was as I was starting to again get that feeling, you know what, it's time to get my physical. It's time to make sure that me and my family have been proactive in terms of our medical, our dental, and so on and so forth. Because again, you're trying to reduce the number of stressors that you can control and that will allow you to devote your time into getting yourself together for your company, figuring out what's next, building your entrepreneurial dream, mapping out your future, um, um, navigating your network. All of those things take time. And if you can get as many things off of your plate and put them in a space where you feel comfortable and you feel like you have a little bit of control over them, that's what I found was the best transition. And that's what I coach all of the folks who I work with. Start now. If you're even thinking about what's next for you, make sure that you have some of these backup options and aspects that are really important in your life that you're thinking about those.
So, Sheree, as we, think about this particular segment and wrapping it, I want to remind the listeners that, if you reflect on the stories that we're telling, that you have to separate who you are from what you do. They're completely different things, right? We don't take what we do to the grave, right? We do take who we are and what people remember about us because very few people will remember the work, right? And that's important for me. I was told by a mentor recently, that you never see a Brinks truck kind of being, moving behind a casket, right? Those things don't happen. So what are we chasing? So I want to make sure that we remember that as we think about the returning to your core values, your authentic self is so important before any of the titles and the armor that you build up, came into play. Should we really quick, why don't we talk about, legal tools that people should think about as they are in roles and transitioning. So there's a checklist
Mhm.
here that you've developed that it'd be great to take the listeners through.
Yeah. So as we talked about in the last segment, in terms of leadership, leadership ours is the importance of thinking about yourself in a number of different dimensions. And one of those really important dimensions is thinking about the strategy for how you're going to transition. Um, it's interesting. In my career, I have navigated a number of mergers and acquisitions, right? That's kind of one of the highlights of what I just enjoy doing. And of course, there's some legal components or governance components, but it all requires the same rigor um, all the time to corporate strategy, right? So you do the due diligence on the target, you figure out how much you're going to pay, you figure out the value, you figure out who's going to do what. And when you're thinking about yourself, and think of yourself as the company, right? Understanding your own value proposition and creating systems for your growth, creating systems for what happens for you in the future. And the hardest part isn't really the business plan. It's, as you talked about, it's the identity shift. It's separating who you are from what you do. And so making sure on your way out, you are set up as much as you can. You have the appropriate financial means. You're thinking about all the different aspects of what is going to help you have a smooth transition as you think about what's next. So, a couple things that are really important to me as I think about the transition. So, the first, is non compete agreements. And the reason why I'm starting with that is I've been able to sit at the table and been on both sides. I've been on the table with the executive who's negotiating, I've been the one negotiating. And what companies don't tell you is often the non compete is much broader and more enforceable than executives realize. And so it's really important to understand your agreements. Gather up all your agreements. Make sure you understand as you're thinking about what's next for you, you understand whether or not you can proceed in the same space, whether you have limitations, whether they're time limitations or geographical limitations or technology limitations. So understand that, because I would hate for you, and I've had this conversation probably maybe 2 months ago, I can recall, there was a young man who was very excited about what was next for him. He created his own company, but when we took a look at his non compete, and at the time he retained me, um, the non compete really sat on exactly the industry that he wanted to pursue. And so he had to make a pivot, or he was going to be afoul of the agreement. So understanding your non compete agreement. Number two, understanding your equity in your restricted stock units and all of the aspects around your 401k. I
That's right. The timing
Yes, yes,
there.
yes.
Timing of
When
when
you
you leave.
leave and what happens in terms of triggers when you leave. I've seen situations where unvested stock represented hundreds of thousands of forfeited dollars because of lack of planning. Timing
That's
is
right.
everything.
And I think Cherie here too is if you're in a good situation and you're thinking about the exit, the earlier you plan and communicate, ideally if you're in the right organization, this can work out well for you.
Absolutely.
If there's a win-win in it for you and the
That's right.
corporation.
That's right. The third legal aspect is deferred comp. And again, not everyone is has the ability to take advantage of this, but if you do, to your point, timing. The timing of your exit can affect tax treatment. And so I'd recommend that you consult a tax attorney. That amount that you're paying for your tax attorney or any other resources can be a significant investment in terms of you having that peace of mind. And it'll make all the difference. The other, number four, legal literacy, is consulting agreements. Consulting agreements can protect you, or they can extend corporate control over you post departure. So if you decide to do some work with that company, again, make sure that you understand what you're signing, you understand what the scope of the work is. And I think net, just number five, is every departure, uh, in my opinion, and I'm biased, but every departure I think requires an attorney with zero ties to the employer, right? So I'm not saying consult your local HR department. I'm saying have an attorney who is working for you to just take a high level look at your agreements. Explain to them what it is that you're intending to do, and they will help to navigate you. And that way you have the peace of mind. You may think, oh, I'm not getting a lot of money. It may be worthwhile, to understand where you are so that you're not leaving money on the table. And again, I'm all about peace of mind, and really thinking about your departure just with this just as much energy as I think about the work that I do on a day-to-day basis, the M&A work, the legal strategy, the governance. Think about that from your own personal standpoint.
And Sheree, one other point there is going into a role. So depending on where you're entering a business, consult a lawyer going in, right? Have a lawyer look at your agreements when you come
100%.
in so that you don't have to try to fix all of this when you come out, right? Certainly at that senior executive level, do not accept the role without having a lawyer look at your documentation, your offer, and add in elements that are going to be important for you and that will protect you. And most C-suite executives have got this got this down, but this can also apply in other areas. To your point, don't leave anything on the table. And many times these lawyers will know other examples of what executives are doing, getting right in exchange for the effort that you're
That's
going to
right.
give there. So
Yeah, just
thanks, Sheree.
one
Yeah.
last thing. One common complaint that I hear, and it saddens me because many times when you are departing a company, the company gives you paperwork that you have to sign, and you feel like, okay, I'll sign it and just be done. But what many people don't realize is a lot of what you're asked to sign is negotiable. So if you miss the window on the front end, to your point, if you can, always get a lawyer to review your paperwork beforehand, because the lawyer is thinking about not just you starting, but they're thinking about your exit strategy as well. You may be on cloud nine with the opportunity, and that's wonderful that you got the opportunity, but your lawyer is going to help you think about the exit strategy as well.
That's right. Keep
Mhm.
business first
That's right.
always. Be elated later, but it's always business. So, Cherie, as we think about, everything that we've talked about and move into wrapping up the podcast, there's a few things that give me hope, right? We know that women-owned businesses right now are at 39% of all US businesses, and that women themselves are creating $2.7 trillion in revenue and employing over 12 million workers. So there's infrastructure there, and the market's responding and has no choice but to respond at this stage. What needs to be true, and a lot of what we're doing is building the support systems for those of you that want to make that exit, as you've seen Cherie and I, or heard Cherie and I talk about. But for those of you that are staying in, if you're contemplating exiting or a return to something, right, we want to make sure that the systems are in place so that you understand that you're not out there on your own, but that many others are making those transitions, whether they're staying in or they're coming out.
Yeah. And I would say, just to piggyback on that, with trust in managers at 29% that you mentioned, Irania, and burnout at crisis levels, the leaders who win in the next decade will be those who can marry authenticity with authority and not having to choose between them and refusing to compartmentalize those.
Agree, Cherie. And I think having a coach helps you to really nail those areas down, right? That outside thinking. So really, relative to all of that, right? What we want to do in this podcast and what we're super excited about is building a community. So if you're in this messy middle, join us and listen in. With everyone experiencing burnout, the women, the 600,000 Black women that have been displaced, there are people that are exactly in the position that you are in there, right? And yes, there's another way to do life. There's another way to do
Yes.
career, but you need the help and you need the community to help you think about that. You don't have to solve it yourself. As Sheree mentioned earlier, there's support systems and coaches out there to
That's right.
help you.
And if this conversation is landing for you, we want to hear from you. And the next episode, we're going to go deeper into personal brand and what it means to rebuild your professional identity on your own terms.
So you don't want to miss the episode. But as we close, I'm going to ask you to sit with the question that we explored today during today's broadcast. And it's not just what do I want to leave, right? But what are you building towards? So, all the things that you're learning, all the work that you're doing, what are you building towards? And this level of clarity is the beginning of your strategic return. And with that, thank you for listening. And we look forward to seeing you in episode 3.